Thank you, Patty, and thanks very much for making the trip down. Our last panel, I'd like to welcome up now, and as I've done before, I'll introduce them as they come up here. This third panel is going to discuss actions that Congress, FERC, and regional markets either have taken or could take to improve the economics of the existing fleet or better recognize their value. Joining us are Quinn, who heads FERC's Office of Energy Policy and Innovation. Prior to assuming that role, Arnie held several other positions at the Commission, including Director of the Division of Economic and Technical Analysis. We also have Craig Glazer, who serves as Vice President for Federal Government Policy for PJM Interconnection. In this capacity, Mr. Glazer coordinates all of PJM's regulatory and legislative policies. PJM operates the largest competitive wholesale electricity market in the world and serves over 9% of the U.S. population. We've got Sue Tierney, Senior Advisor at Analysis Group, where she specializes in energy policy and economics in the electric and gas industries. We've haunted some of the same hallways because she was formerly Assistant Secretary for Policy at DOE. And then we've got Matt Bennett, who joined three fellow co-founders in establishing Third Way back in 2005. He's also served as Deputy Assistant to the President for Intergovernmental Affairs in the Clinton administration, where he was Principal White House Liaison to Governors. And I'm pleased to announce our moderator for this part of the program, Dan Utech, who's Director for Energy and Climate Change at the White House Domestic Policy Council. As one of the President's top White House advisors on energy and climate change, Dan coordinates policy development and implementation on these issues across the administration, which he joined in 2009. Dan, take it away.
Good to see you. All right, thank you. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you, panelists, for participating. Thank you to DOE for sponsoring this important event. One of the things I did before they came into the administration was I worked on the Hill for a while and staffed a lot of hearings, particularly in the Senate EPW committee. And as I was thinking about what I might say to kick this off, it reminded me of a hearing that I staffed one time, and I think we were kind of late in the hearing, maybe the second or third panel, and it came turn for a senator who had arrived for the first time to start to make his remarks. And he said, well, I think we've reached that point in the hearing where everything's been said, but not yet by everyone. And so I certainly would not apply that to the remarks that I'm expecting to hear from the panelists, but I would at least to my opening remarks. So I'll try to be very brief. I think we've heard most recently, really eloquent testimony about the importance of nuclear plants to communities across the country. We know how important it is to our reliable electricity supply. It's certainly important to what we're trying to achieve over time in terms of getting to lower carbon emissions, which is, of course, a high priority for the President and the administration. So I think it's a very important set of discussions we're having here today. And I guess we of course want to be forward-looking, and I think that's the primary purpose. I do want to say, I think, going back to the start of the administration, I think the President, Secretary Chu, Secretary Moniz certainly have been very supportive of nuclear. We hoped for and got through the House, but not through the Senate, a comprehensive cap-and-trade program that was supported by the industry. I think would have helped a lot. When it was clear that had not succeeded, the President then proposed a national clean energy standard in his State of the Union in 2011. But we couldn't get any traction there, so we had moved on to the Clean Power Plan and other mechanisms that I think are less perfect, but certainly have the potential to be helpful in this area. So I think we've, as an administration, tried to think about and move on the things that we think that we can control and that would be helpful. I'm interested in focusing today on this panel as it was teed up on what Congress, FERC, and regional markets might be able to do. And so I thought I would start actually first with Sue. Sue, you've had experience in the federal government, state government, in the private sector, working on market issues, environmental regulations. So maybe I'll let you kick it off, and with the scope of the panel that we've talked about, and maybe using my prerogative as the moderator of the last panel, to the extent that you want to touch on state or other issues that were addressed in prior panels, I think that'd be useful as well. But maybe just start off and see, what do you think are the things on top of your list as to what Congress, FERC, regional market reforms, states or others might be able to do here?
Thank you, Dan. Is this on? No. Is it on now? Okay, I turned it off. Sorry. Boy, after the eloquent comments, I'm afraid I have to announce to you guys that I'm a terrible wonk. And so I'm going to sound pretty concrete here. But I think there are a number of things that could happen. I'd like to talk about one thing that could happen at FERC that could happen pretty urgently. I'd like to talk about some things that could happen perhaps with a sense of momentum at Congress. So that one maybe isn't urgent, isn't immediate, but it could be very important. And then I'd like to talk about two things, again, urgent, fast in the states, and then less fast in the states. And I'll try to be very quick. On the fast action things, there is currently a very comprehensive docket that is open at FERC that addresses price formation in the competitive markets. You're just going to have to bear with me here for a moment. If you adjusted a variety of things, the offer price caps that exist in most of the centralized markets are set at a particular place. And were they allowed to be raised, you could have scarcity pricing occur for short periods of time, which actually could provide a revenue stream. Additionally, you could address this uplift problem that Bill Moll mentioned. And that's a situation where you have plants that are not who are being operated maybe at their minimum generation level, and therefore they're not counted in price formation. You have a large piece of the market that therefore is actually money's being spent on, but other generators are not seeing that in their own prices. You could have more varied hourly prices across all the RTOs, and so that you would have more flexibility. You could have an attribute of on-site or firm energy supply in peak periods that would be eligible for nuclear plants, which is typically not the case today, where there have been short-term approaches to that. So those are a couple of suggestions, and having that happen in 2016 and hearing a chorus of people asking for to get on with that would be really wonderful. So, okay, write that one down. Congress, I would love to see Congress addressing a production tax credit as an urgent matter and available for existing nuclear generators on a non-discriminatory basis. We heard earlier a suggestion that that could happen for incremental uprates. But given this is a period of transition that we're in between now and the expected implementation of the Clean Power Plan, this could be an approach to provide some kind of bridge to a period in which prices in energy markets would be reflecting carbon. So in the states, I would encourage places like New York to adopt a non-discriminatory, comprehensive clean energy standard that doesn't discriminate against some nuclear plants, such as the one that has been proposed in New York right now. I have prepared a proposal that would include all nuclear plants, all renewables, again, non-discriminatory basis that would allow for fair, equal treatment. When states restructured their energy markets, they, by and large, adopted what they call a non-bypassable system charge, system benefit charge, and it was almost entirely used for retaining support for energy efficiency because it was seen as an important tool and at a time of transitions when people were not knowing what was going to happen. A state could adopt a system benefit charge, a collection of dollars across the entire suite of customers of electricity, and then use that as a revenue stream to provide some kind of side payment. The reason I suggest that is that it might escape the problems that some of the long-term contracts were not able to escape when the Supreme Court issued its Hughes decision just a couple of weeks ago. So finding something that is less about changing wholesale prices and more about some kind of other approach might be workable. And I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sue. I think a lot to discuss there. Maybe I'll turn to Matt Bennett next. and ask a similar kind of open-ended question. Then we'll come to our other panelists, FERC and PJM, to ask for a response and their ideas. But Matt, I know Third Way's had a long-standing interest in nuclear energy, and so appreciate your thoughts on the same kind of question.
There you go. If Sue is playing the role of the wonk, I will play the role of the political hack at this table. I don't often find Marv Fertel to be scary, but I found his remarks to be deeply, deeply frightening. And you all should too. It is terrifying to think about the loss of our nuclear fleet for lots of reasons, whether you're animated by climate change, as I am, or by the loss of fuel diversity, as we all should be, or by the impact on communities, or all the other things that have been discussed today. And they've been discussed, I think, very thoroughly, but in a fairly dry way. I think we need to acknowledge first that the house is on fire. And there is something that we can do to start to douse the flames, but we have got to do it. There's a lot of things that seem to be set in stone in these debates that really aren't. There's a lot of ideas that we believe are just fixed. One of them is that there's nothing Congress can do. I think that is wrong. First of all, Congress is doing things. Yesterday, Congress passed overwhelmingly in the Senate EPW committee and unanimously in the House nuclear bills. These may not be directly related to the challenges that the existing fleet is facing, but they are related to an appetite in Congress, a beginning of a culminating idea about nuclear that is bipartisan. We had people from all the way on one side of the debate to all the way on the other voting for these bills. I think that is a very positive sign, and I think it suggests that the idea that there's nothing that Congress can do to help save these plants is simply wrong. We've heard some of the ideas. Obviously, a CES, a national CES would be fantastic, a carbon tax. But there's more creative things on the horizon as well. Mike Wallace wrote a piece for CSIS in which he recommended that the government take over some of the plants that are being shut down and keep the maintenance up so that they can be restarted eventually. I don't know whether that is plausible or not, but it's an idea and it should be considered. There are power purchase agreements that DOD or other government agencies could strike that would help keep the price up for these plants and get them through the fallow period. But I think, for me, most importantly, and maybe the thing that ties all of this together, is the underlying assumptions about gas, which is, after all, the thing that is killing the nuclear plants. The UK decided 30 years ago that they had enough North Sea gas so they could shut their nuclear industry down, and they allowed it to drift. That turned out not to be true. When President Obama took office, Dan, as you know, many of the assumptions that were presented to him and then Secretary Chu about what was happening in the energy space turned out to be totally wrong. Oil would be at $110 a barrel, and we're going to build 25 new nuclear plants, and gas was going to be $12. There's plenty of things that could change the long-term price of gas. Earthquakes, exports, emissions problems, all kinds of things could happen. So my point to all of you is, do not assume that anything you think you know about the politics of this issue in Washington are true, because we think that they're changing, and they're changing rapidly.
Good. Thank you, Matt. Arnie, I think I'd like to turn to you next. Sue touched on some of the things that FERC's looking at, and so I wanted to see if you could sort of cover some of that, but also respond to, the proposition that's been put forward today, I think, in other places, that the wholesale market's not fully compensating nuclear for the value that it provides, either in terms of fuel diversity or the carbon-free, the carbon footprint of it, or other attributes that nuclear has. So if you could comment on that in a general sense, and also talk a little bit about what FERC is currently working on.
Here we go. So, yeah, I'd be happy to to respond. I think it's important to start out with what the wholesale markets were designed to do and what they're designed to reflect. and then ask the question about whether it's fair that it doesn't reflect some other things, and whether that constitutes a market failure of some sort, or it's simply a reflection of the fact that these markets don't do some of the things that policymakers want them to do. What they do well when they're well designed is reflect the value of what the system needs. What the system needs can evolve over time, and we need to be careful to make sure that we're constantly asking ourselves if all of the things that the system needs are properly being valued. So things like flexibility are something that maybe once upon a time we didn't worry a lot about, but now we do worry a lot about. I think Sue mentioned some of the things that we are doing, price formation, and it gets super nerdy and techy really fast the moment we start to talk about what that actually means. At the very highest level, I think it means that the cost of running the system at a moment in time is accurately reflected in the price that you're seeing. Sometimes the system is under a lot of stress, and you want to send a signal to both the load and the resources that anything that can be done to address that system's stress should be done, and you want to do that usually with a fairly high price. We can do things on price formation, and we're doing things on price formation. The Commission's been very active really for 2 years, but particularly active as a commission in the last 6 months on very specific things to make sure that if there's a system emergency, the price reflects that system emergency. I think it's important to think about what the system wants and worry less about how resources are doing it. So more comfortable about just saying you get a lot of value if you're available at the moment of highest system need, and resources, you go figure out how to do that. If you do that with firm fuel contracts, that's great. If you do that with enhanced maintenance, that's great. But resources figure that out. The other things like fuel diversity and carbon are things that the markets don't do, and they weren't designed to do. Fuel diversity is a risk management concept, and individual market participants are going to have a different assessment of risk and how much value they place on fuel diversity. We've traditionally, in regulated states, relied on the state to do that. In restructured markets, we typically ask the load-serving entities to do that. So to say that our markets don't value fuel diversity is probably right, but that doesn't mean that individual market participants can't value fuel diversity. And the only question is, do our markets get in the way of that? And then finally, carbon price. I think there are places in the country states that have decided to put a price on carbon, and where they've done that carbon price has flowed through the wholesale markets perfectly well with very little impediment. Whether that carbon price is high enough for the state goal that we're talking about is another question, but the wholesale markets aren't the impediment once the carbon price has been set.
Okay, thank you, Arnie. Craig, I'll turn to you next, and perhaps maybe if you could. I know we've got a lot of people in the room in the know, but maybe you could start out by saying a little about PJM first, and then talking about some of the recently implemented capacity performance reforms. So what's your take on those and the incentive that they might provide to keep the existing nuclear fleet going?
Okay, thank you. And we have a little microphone reliability problem up there with an electric reliability issue. First off, thank you for this opportunity. Just a word about PJM. We are the grid operator in 13 states, including in this building, helping to keep the lights on in this building. And our job is to keep the lights on as well as operate a competitive market for electricity. Operate really one of the largest ones in the world. And we are regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. On the other hand, I just left meetings of 13 state regulators that don't necessarily see eye to eye on all these issues either. But because I'm the last panelist, I get sort of a chance, I think, to a little bit correct the record, because there is a soundbite problem in this town. There's always a soundbite problem. But I don't want people to leave with a soundbite that I kind of heard today, that the markets are not valuing the attributes of nuclear power. You can argue the degree to which they're doing, but to walk away with that soundbite, frankly, would be incorrect. And you only have to go watch us next Tuesday. We are announcing the results. As we speak right now, we are clearing our capacity market, which has a specific feature in it, new feature in it, which looks at and values the performance of units, okay, and actually awards units that are there year-round, day after day, and who is a prime candidate that qualifies for that? Nuclear. Frankly, I had less gray hair when we started this effort. Arnie was 6 inches taller when we started this effort. This was not easy to do. So back to David's very good point, none of this is easy to do, but we did it. And we're actually clearing the second market. But there is a difference between awarding performance, which I think nuclear qualifies for, versus just awarding nuclear. We have made the decision we want to award performance, but I've got a long history. I remember really good performing nuclear units, and I know of really bad performing nuclear units. And I don't think the public would be very happy if we were just awarding really bad performing nuclear units. So we didn't go there. We went toward performance. Okay, and frankly, the results have been very promising so far. Is it the total answer? No. But it's interesting that we're in this building having this discussion, because much of the answer, I would argue, deals with policy, deals with national consensus. And let's face it, we've got a national consensus passed in 1992 for competition in the electric industry. We have a national consensus on the production tax credit for wind. Whether we like it or not, we have such a national consensus. We don't have a national consensus on nuclear. So maybe all of us, instead of just talking to ourselves, ought to be in the 8 floors below this room to having that discussion. And frankly, we're in the middle of a national election, but we're talking about a lot of things, but I don't hear this issue being talked about very much. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us, the collective we, not criticizing anybody here, but the collective we, to bring these issues forward. You can't, as Arnie said, the markets, I view the market, I'll close with this. I view the markets like a blender. You put in the resources, you put in the public policy, you push the mix button, and it spits out the result for those. And it does it very efficiently and effectively and gives you the least price cost resource that reflects those policies. One problem we have is I don't have a policy shaker that says nuclear in itself receives this added attribute. I don't have one that says units that don't affect the viewshed get preference either. I don't have those. So it's a little hard to just sort of, and the question is who decides to just add it to the blender when it's not otherwise there. I would argue that the people that have to add it to the blender are the people in this building, the people, the voters out there. I think that is where much of this has to happen. Do we have a role in that? Absolutely. Are we at PJM stepping up to that? Absolutely. Is FERC stepping up to that? Absolutely. But we can't solve it all just on ourselves. So at the end, to close this meeting, maybe we all go to the other 8 floors of this building. Thank you very much.
So thanks for those comments, Craig. And I think obviously that's one of the reasons that we're having the event here up on the Hill, is so that it's easy for staff and others to attend. And I know that there are people in this room that routinely walk the halls here. But I think that point's well taken, as well as I can sense the strain of being betwixt and between a number of different regulatory bodies that PJM faces. I guess I think one of the things that strikes me listening to this conversation is we have, Sue talked about, we have sort of on different timescales, we have different needs, and I think in different places. And so we have a number of kind of urgent issues that we're facing in specific places today. I think we have over, just in the next few years, we have looking out to the next decade, and obviously what happens to those plants will influence how we're doing on carbon and other things in the next decade. But I think if we look a little further out we have the challenge, we face the same kind of questions around the remainder of the fleet. And so I'm wondering if people could comment on the extent to which, both near-term versus long-term, and also like localized issues versus things that are solvable on a national basis, how we should think about that. What are the sort of levels at which those problems could be best and most effectively addressed, either on, the near-term things, the more local things, versus the longer-term things. So, Sue, maybe I'll come back to you to start. And Craig, you are on the last panel, but you're not the last panelist. I think some of our panelists have an opportunity to come back to you as well.
Thanks, Dan. That's a great question. And I want to both agree strenuously with Craig about something and then disagree with him. When I heard Craig and I think Arnie talking about the fact that the markets really can't be pointed to as a problem because they are functioning properly as we have set them up. Agree with that, with these tweaks that I've described. But we have a fundamental market failure in this country associated with not that carbon emissions are a true cost to society, and they are not reflected in our markets. And there are lots of techniques for doing that aren't pro-nuclear or anti-nuclear. They are pro-markets and internalizing those costs into prices better. So just about everything I described as urgent and fast action was about perfecting markets, getting price formation to be actually more effective. It would add some dollars of revenue stream that are truly things that people should be paying for. That can happen. Clean energy standards are market-based approaches that are technology neutral, that are designed to compensate for the fact that there is zero carbon supply. And it's reflective across technologies. A transition strategy to the Clean Power Plan. The Clean Power Plan will be very helpful in addressing this fundamental market failure, and that will be an approach adopted in many states for addressing how to deal with carbon. That will occur, and I'm confident it will occur, starting in 2022. As has been finalized by the EPA. But we have a situation now in which if plants are financially stressed, they cannot wait for 2022 to be making these kinds of issues. So transition strategies that are market-based seem to me about something that we ought to be able to agree with. A national policy on competition, absolutely. A national policy moving toward cleaner energy, and nuclear power plants cannot be mothballed during a period waiting for that to happen. So some transition strategies, again, a potential favorite of mine is something like a production tax credit or a clean energy standard that is a transition path that gets you to this other side when we are going to have something more comprehensive.
Sue, can you just say a little more about kind of within that range, or just kind of a rough cut in terms of what you think is needed? How much of that can be addressed through the kind of market reforms that FERC is looking at versus, kind of a transition strategy that would require legislation either here or at the state level?
Well, I do think that much of this, well, it would be awesome if some of this could happen in Washington, and I'm glad we're having the meeting in this room. I do think some of the actors may move more quickly in states, and so that's great because many of these approaches that I'm describing, except for the price formation issues at FERC, are things that states could move forward. I think that my suggestions about the market reforms and price formation at FERC probably only add maybe a quarter of the way that may be needed to compensate and retain nuclear reactors in the mix for several years. RGGI right now, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, is up in 9 states in the Northeast where many of these nuclear plants exist. Were they to adopt a more aggressive price in the very near term, things could move in that direction as well. So there are various ways to hit it, from either prices that go, allowances for carbon that go into the price of offer prices in these markets is one way to get it, and clean energy payment streams, more like renewable energy credits, are another way to get these into the market.
Matt, same kind of general question to you about sort of time scales, spatial scales, urgency of the problem, kind of longer term problem. What do you think the right range of solutions at different levels?
Well, as I noted earlier, I think the problem is super urgent right now, and I think people like us ought to be doing more to put pressure on people in this building and around here to do things about it. I do agree that most action is going to happen at the states. That's obviously right. There are some adjustments that can be made to the markets also, but there are things that Congress can do, particularly, as you point out, Dan, looking toward the 2030s and beyond, when the entire fleet eventually is going to have to shut down. These things are not going to run forever. And we need to make sure that the U.S. nuclear industry is not presiding over the slow decline and death of a technology that was invented here, perfected here, and can be continued. So I think among the things that need to be done are steps taken to make these plants more competitive during their lifetime. And then, as many of you know, we're very focused on the next generation of nuclear energy and what we can do to bring new reactors, the Generation 4 reactors, online.
Okay. Thanks, Matt. Arnie, I know it gets wonky, but I'm wondering if you could say a little bit more in depth, because I think we do have, at least here in the room, a pretty sophisticated audience about the kinds of reforms that you're currently considering, and I would wonder whether you would agree with Sue's take about, whether you and Craig would both agree with Sue's take about sort of the rough cut as to how much value might be possible or attainable through the kinds of reforms that you and PJM are working on.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Out of fear that people will stop listening as soon as I agree with Sue that it's only 25%, I think she's probably about right. It's probably a part of the solution, but it's unlikely to be enough to save the nuclear fleet and under the stress they're under. So some of the things that we are doing specifically, there is a cap on how much a resource can offer into the market. Right now it's $1,000. You can get into situations where the actual cost of producing electricity will be over $1,000. And the Commission has proposed that when that happens, you get this extreme winter weather that we got in 2014, that prices are allowed to go above $1,000 to reflect the actual cost of producing electricity. That's one of the things the Commission has proposed to do. Another thing the Commission has proposed to do is there is this administrative construct that the markets hold reserves, a certain amount of generation that's on the side in case a big bad thing happens. And when the market goes deficient of the reserves, at least the amount of reserves they're supposed to hold, there's supposed to be an administrative price that is set that is higher probably than the marginal cost of the unit actually producing electricity. And that sends a signal that says, hey, the system's under stress. If you're a load resource and you can decrease consumption, you should do that. If you're a generation resource, you're really valuable, and it's really important that you're online and performing right now. Some of the markets don't invoke that shortage price for every single shortage, and the Commission has proposed that every time there's a shortage, even if it only lasts for 15 minutes, that a shortage price gets invoked. And that's probably an important thing to appreciate, is these shortages actually are designed to not last for very long, because engineers like to get things back into normal as fast as possible. And so you're going to rely on a lot of shortage prices in that situation. And then the last thing is something that's been talked about a couple times. There are these out-of-market actions that the system operator will take. I think it's important not to impugn the system operator when they take that. Some of the fundamental issue is these are incredibly complicated systems with thousands of physical limits on transmission lines and resources and the different physics of actually operating the system, that all of which can't get into the market model that spits out prices and decides which resources should be operating. But there are ways to make sure that those out-of-market actions can find their way into the price. And so there's a whole set of reforms the Commission has asked about ways to make sure when those out-of-market actions happen, not judging whether they're important for reliability or not, but just have them find their way into prices to the extent possible. And where it's not possible, make it transparent. Let everyone know what happened, why it happened, how much it happened, simply so that the conversation become a little bit more sophisticated, and so people can recognize what the issues are on the system in case there's a more cost-effective way to address it.
Good, thanks. Greg, you talked about some of the things that you're working on and your views, some of your views about what markets are kind of supposed to do, not do. You talked about the capacity performance product, and you said that was promising. I'm wondering if you could say a little bit more about that and what the premium for reliable generation was in that first auction.
Well, and again, there was an explicit premium. I think this auction will tell even more. There was probably not as much of a premium as we expected in the first auction, but I think we're going to see more and more of a premium. Two things happen. One is there is a premium built in for these capacity performance units that qualify. Two is, interestingly, the ComEd zone sort of separated. So we zone that is particularly focused on nuclear, that area separated and the price was higher. So that's also indicating the valuation in that region. And third, we are moving, this is only itself a transition, we are rapidly moving to a situation where the only units that will qualify will be units that meet this superior standard. We got a lot of people unhappy with that, including demand response providers and others, very unhappy with that. But we're only in a pretty short transition, and in a year or so, we will soon be in a situation where virtually everything is at this premium level, and there'll be no inferior products. So I think that's the trajectory on that is very, very positive. I will just say, I think one of the issues as we go into this, and I love David Owens and how he characterizes this, is what's the goal? And as people write a report, I think there's a question here. Is the goal clean, reliable, efficient production of electricity? And how do we get that? I think that is a very important goal, and we can focus on that. If I'll be controversial in this room, maybe regret it, but if the goal is I just save nuclear only for nuclear, then I think that's a different goal. And you can do that goal, but you don't do that through a market. You basically do a production tax credit or something like that. But we're trying to do this in a way that achieves those other goals. And I think that's important to keep that on the prize. Because frankly, if you start writing checks, the problem is everybody else in this town is also going to be lining up for those, from landfill gas to demand response to energy efficiency. I go to these panels all the time, and there's an equal audience for coal and gas and energy efficiency. So I would say whatever you come up with, keep your eye on the prize, on the goal. Thank you.
Dan, can I just make one comment on that? I totally agree with what Craig said. Modeling and the real results in the markets indicate that actually the retirements of generating units are going to lead to the next day and the next period after that an increase in prices just because of the replacement of the baseload units that are operating at the origins of the supply curve. And so that's a reality that I think, I haven't heard that many people talking about that today, because people are talking about a payment to generators, but there really is this contribution that will be lost, and prices will reflect the fact that they'll be replaced by higher cost units.
Good. Well, thanks for that, Sue. I think I appreciate the comments of all the panelists. I think it's been a good discussion. I believe Senator Crapo has arrived, so I think we're going to wrap this a little early. Thank you all for your participation.
Thank you.